reasons like I don't have enough money, or I don't have enough free time, or I don't have resources. Start on it today. Many people want to write a book, but only a few actually will take the step to becoming an author. You don't need to sacrifice everything. You can work on it a little bit every day. So if the aspiring author sits down and writes 300 words, that'll only take them 15 or 20 minutes. If they do that for 3 or 4 months, they'll quickly finish a draft of 50 or 60,000 words.
Welcome to the Mindful Dream podcast, where we help you to not decide what's really important while chasing your dreams. Today's guest is Bryan Collins, who's a writer, writing coach, and the founder of Become a Writer Today. He was originally a journalist, but lost his job during the recession, and he bounced around a few different roles, and he couldn't decide what he wanted to do. For a little bit of time, he also plucked chickens during this period. He then worked for Sage for multiple years, whilst building his own business up on the side, until eventually he quit and took it full time. He's written several best-selling books along the way. I hope you enjoy our conversation. So welcome, Bryan. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Amar. It's great to be here.
So me and Bryan have been in the same circles for a little while, but it's actually the first time we're ever talking in real life. And we're both part of the same writers mastermind group, where a bunch of different people who have got a fairly big audience and medium come together and share ideas. So while I've never spoken to him before, we have traded messages before, and I've had his feedback on some of my work, especially on the early days. One of the things I ask a guest at the beginning is always, what's some common advice you disagree with?
A couple of years ago, I took a course. It was an online course about selling digital products. To spend more time promoting your work than you do creating it. At the time, I thought this was good advice, so I spent a lot of time promoting a digital course I created through email outreach and social media and Facebook ads and email funnels and lots of crazy digital marketing tactics, which had mixed degrees of success. I think overall I made a couple of grand on the course, but when I think at the time I put into it, probably wasn't time well spent. But the idea that you should spend more time promoting than creating, I feel now is a bad idea for creatives, because if you create something every day, you build up a body of work that you can draw upon, and that will naturally promote itself. There was a great metaphor that Bryan Collins, the business author, puts forward in his book, Turning the Flywheel, whereas it can take a little bit of time to gain momentum on your flywheel, but with enough content, eventually the flywheel will start to move, and then through the power of momentum, you will naturally attract readers or traffic or customers or whatever it is. And secondly, if you're doing any type of creative work, like you're writing for a publication like Entrepreneur's Handbook, if you are constantly writing and constantly pressing publish, send and submit, you're getting more chances to get feedback from an editor or from readers. And you're also getting more chances to practice your craft. And if you get more chances to practice your craft, you get more chances to improve. Whereas if you create one great piece like that, that's fantastic if you can promote it, but then you're not creating anything new again for quite a while. The person who gave this advice moved on from promoting online courses. He moved on to an e-commerce business. Of course, it's still good. I'm not criticizing necessarily his course, but I think for creatives, your job is to create something every day, whether that's writing, recording video, podcasting, because that's how you'll improve with your craft.
Yeah, and I think this is quite common where people focus on, at the beginning, too much about getting big straight away. And sometimes, like you're right, it's better to take it a little bit slower, because that way you improve your craft. So when you do get that big breakout moment and maybe you do invest in marketing or adverts, you know that your quality is there. Because if you're driving lots of people to your content early on, but the quality isn't there, then you're going to lose those people. And you don't want them to remember you for those early pieces where you're working out what you're doing. So for me, I think for the first 6 months or so, I didn't really tell anybody that I knew that I was doing the writing online. So at this point, I think it already had 500,000 views across different articles. And it was only once I got that confidence that I then started telling people about it and started marketing it a bit better. But like you said, I think it's quite common because people are told sell, sell, sell. But you need to have that competence. You need to be able to offer something to whoever you're targeting to be successful. It can't just be all marketing. There's got to be some substance underneath it.
And for most people who are working online, that substance is content. And you either got to create the content yourself or work with somebody who can help create it for you, which means you or they need some sort of skills in writing or recording or editing, and also figuring out a distribution too.
So me and Bryan were talking just before this as well. So you mentioned how you were working for Sage for many years, and then you took a bit of a break, and now you've handed in your notice and you're moving on from that. Can you tell me about that decision, about when the time in the past you really struggled with finding the balance and knowing which direction to go into?
Yeah, so I worked for Sage for 8 years as a copywriter and on a content marketing team. For those who don't know Sage, they're a British software company who sell accounting software and software for businesses. I actually learned a lot there about online marketing, and they were a good company to work for. I moved on because a business that I'd started on the side turned into a full-time business, and I wanted to give it I suppose 100% focus once I turned 40, which was a few weeks ago. I suppose there were a couple of times while I was in Sage and I was working on my side hustle, which it was at the time. And I found it really hard to balance having 2 and then 3 kids, like a relatively demanding job. Like, sometimes you'd be working 50 or 60 hour weeks and still trying to follow the advice I gave a few minutes ago, which is you need to create something every day. So at one point I just tasked myself at writing 300 words. But what I found was that when I focused on work, it would take time away from family. And when I focused on family, it would take time away from learning new skills for Sage. And when I worked on all 3, it would take time away from personal relationships and other hobbies outside of Sage. So eventually I decided, that I'm happy at the level I was at in the company. I didn't want to go any further. And maybe there were some projects that I didn't volunteer or put my hand up for because I knew they'd take time away from those other interests that I had. Then when our first son was born, our third son, I actually went down to a 4-day week. So I could spend some time or extra time with him as well. And then I took a career break and then, handed in my notice in December of this year. I guess my takeaway looking back over the past 8 or 9 years is that it's not possible to get, for most people, to get your family life and to get your career and your outside friendships and your hobbies and everything all in balance all of the time. Sometimes you really do got to focus on work because there's a big project you're on, or you want to launch, a course, or you have a writing deadline that you want to hit. And then sometimes you need to spend more time with your family, like if a baby arrives. And then maybe if you find yourself bored at the weekends, maybe you've neglected some friendships. So I guess they're some of the hard lessons that I've learned over the past few years. But I'd still try and live by the advice that if I create one thing every day or do one thing creative, then makes the rest of the day feel easier, and I don't feel the same sense of I'm not doing anything useful with my free time.
Can you tell me a bit more about the decision to go down to a 4-day week? Because I think that's something people might consider and they like the idea of, but not so many people have actually done that. So you said it was after the birth of your third son. Was it something you wanted to do for quite a while, or was it more of a decision based on the circumstances at that particular point in time?
Yeah, so I went down to he's 3 now, so I went down to a 4-day week when he was born after parental leave, which was 2 weeks at the time, and it meant taking a 20% pay cut and also not being hands-on with some like work projects which were high profile at the time. The way I thought about it was, am I going to be in Sage in 5 years' time? Probably not. So that was the first reason. The second reason was my side business was beginning to get a little bit of revenue and traffic, and I was thinking that I don't really have time to work on it and Sage and a new baby. So how can I find time for all 3? And then so what would I put first? So I put Sage third. So that was the second reason. And the third reason was I knew 6 months in that things would be stabilized at home with a new baby, and I'd probably have Fridays or Friday afternoons free to work on the business. So I wanted to get an idea for what that would be like before I potentially took a career break and handed in my notice. And like my manager in Sage was, very supportive of going down to a 4-day week. And surprisingly, after tax, it wasn't actually as big as a drop in income as I thought. And I did have savings as well built up to do this. So then the opportunity came along, Christmas came along last year after the pandemic, and I decided that what would be the next step? It would either be go back to Sage and, recommit to doing management courses and getting to the next level and maybe sell the content website that I'd built up and focus on like a traditional corporate career. But I knew I didn't want to do that. So my other option was to take a career break. So I took a career break and I spent the first half of the year, this was during writing a book, kind of a story-driven book about parenting, because I just wanted to do a creative project. And then when I finished the book, I kind of moved on to building the content websites that I talked about a few minutes ago. So the year went by pretty quickly. So a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to my manager and I said, look, I've had a great time or a great run, but I want to hand in my notice. It's not right for me to come back. And to be honest, I think they knew, and, they wished me well and said goodbye. And that was kind of my thought process, was to do it in small milestones rather than burn the boats. And the reason for that is, I probably should have said this at the start, but when I was a freelance journalist 10 years ago, I quit a couple of jobs spur of the moment because I had another exciting idea or project to work on, and they didn't always pan out, and I actually spent some time claiming social welfare and having no money. So I wanted to do the opposite of that burn the boats approach and take a more managed risk approach, which I suppose is probably important if you have kids and other commitments.
Yeah, and that makes sense. So it's interesting there that you learned from your previous experience before, where you made the jump like straight away to the phased approach. And I think the phased approach does make sense for many people. And it really depends on your company, doesn't it? So if your company was, and your manager was willing to allow you to do that, that obviously helps. And I guess this is similar for you, and it was the same for me as well, is that in the UK, like once you get over a certain amount of income, the taxes are set at such a rate that you need to earn quite a significant amount more for it to actually make a big difference to your bottom line. And at the same time, if you lose a bit of income, the actual difference to your day-to-day life isn't very big. And it's obviously a privileged position to be into if you get to that stage. But say the difference between, think about numbers in the UK, so between like 60k and 65k, the actual difference in what you take home is basically negligible, because you've got 40% income tax, you've got your 9% national insurance tax, this tax, that tax, pension contributions. So I think sometimes people focus on the overall absolute number of income rather than what does it actually mean for me? What does it actually mean for my disposable income? So I think that's quite a good point that you made there, that people should really pay attention to. If they're worried about taking a cut in salary, is convert is what's your disposable income first and see from there rather than just basing on the high gross number.
The maths in Ireland are pretty similar with tax. So it works out as about 50% of your wages after you factor everything in. So it boils down to, how do you want to spend your time? And do you want to spend, 50 hours a week working for a company? And if you do, and you love the company, fantastic. But are there other things that you want to work on? I suppose the other thing I've learned is I've been made redundant a few times, and no matter how great a company or an employer, you're still an employee. You can be made redundant. So I would say it's far better to have something that you can call your own, and to build something that you can call your own, to have a side gig that could potentially turn into a full-time business. Sure, there are risks, but there are still risks with working as an employee for a company as well.
Hi everyone, I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. I want to take a quick break to ask you to check in on yourself. There's many people struggling with balance, and there's nothing to be ashamed about. The tips that my guests and I share can hopefully help you along the way. But if you already feel overwhelmed or burnt out, it's probably best that you ask somebody for help too. For some, this might be a friend or family member, but others might feel like they have nobody they can talk to. If you're one of these people, check out the link in the show notes. It's for United for Global Mental Health. They've got helplines all across the world with people willing to listen on the other side. It's important to let somebody know how you're feeling. Now, back to the show. It's not been that long now since you had it in your notice, but obviously you're continuing the life you had in your career break. Is there any change you're making to your lifestyle now that you've gone full time and you're committed to doing this life?
Yeah, so when I was working for a company, I spent a large part of the day on Zoom or Microsoft Teams calls, and we'll go from one half an hour call to the next. So what my day was managed in half an hour increments of phone calls or video conferencing calls, a bit like this. And it was a weird way to look at time. I was always looking at the clock, even when working at home, to think when my next call was. Sometimes I'd, take the calls in the garden with Apple AirPods in. Sometimes I'd take the calls while out for a walk. But basically, my day was mostly calls. And the biggest change for me was looking at a calendar one day and seeing that I have no calls for the entire day. So it was quite liberating and quite intimidating, because it was like, how am I going to fill 8 hours? Because and I have to do something useful with the 8 hours. Otherwise, I should be minding the kids or going back to my day job. So that was quite intimidating. So I tracked how I spent my time, and I tracked the key projects that I want to work on. I'm not saying to get the balance right all the time, but yeah, that's been the biggest change, is not being on calls. And the second biggest change is when you work for yourself, you have more flexibility about how you can spend your days, for better or worse. So my partner still works, so sometimes she'll need to work late so I can pick up the kids early, or sometimes I'll finish early and go for a run or go to the gym. And then if it's dark that night, I might do an hour or two's work that night instead. Whereas when you're working for an employer, you can't really do that, because chances are you have meetings to go to and everybody else is working. So that's been one of the big benefits.
Have you found the transition difficult? So you obviously phased into that approach, but I know that I'm feeling some of the effects myself of, like you said, for better or worse, now that I'm in control of all of my time, I find it quite difficult to sometimes keep myself accountable and also to stop myself from working all the time because everything is my own business. So it's everything about if I work more, then I make more progress. It's not the same as in a corporate role where the more you work, the more you're doing for somebody else. This is, if I put more effort in, then I build something more and I'm getting further towards my goals. Have you got the balance right there, or do you find yourself overworking or underworking?
I don't always have the balance right. So the biggest challenge for me is at 5:30, which is normally the end of the working day. I think because I work in a home office, I go downstairs and I find it quite hard to transition from going upstairs to downstairs, from work life to family life. So sometimes I find myself checking my phone or project management apps or whatever it is I'm working on to see what the latest updates are. Something I'm still working on. But yeah, that transition can be difficult. In terms of working all the time, I think I've gotten a bit better at switching off once I've made the transition. An idea that really helped me is in the book, The 4 Disciplines of Execution. Some of the book isn't really relevant to people unless they're working for corporate companies, but there's one particular section about having lead and lag measures. It just sounds a bit dry. It actually really works for a content business or for writers. So maybe somebody listening could apply it. But basically a lag measure is something that you can't directly influence. So it'd be like your website traffic or your course sales or your downloads of your podcast or your views of your new YouTube channel. So you can look at that and feel anxiety and say, nobody's buying my courses, nobody's listening to my show. Whereas a lead measure is something that you can immediately impact. You can turn the lever on and get the flywheel, from to borrow Jim Collins' metaphor again, moving. So you can write an article, you can publish a podcast, you can record a video. And what I do is I keep track of the lead and lag measures for specific parts of the business. So my main site is Become a Writer Today. So the lag measure will be website traffic and the lead measure is articles published. So what I do is I look at the amount of articles that I want to publish each week. And then at the end of the week, I'll ask myself, did I get that many articles published? Know if that's working or not by the lag measure, which is traffic. So if I see traffic dipping on the site, it could be just a blip, but if I see it happening over time, that will tell me that maybe there's something wrong with the SEO strategy, or the articles aren't right, or I've made some other technical mistake on the site. So if I hit the lead measure goal for the week, then I can say that was a good week. And then they can use the lag measure as a temperature check. So I definitely recommend reading that book, whatever type of work you're in, because I think most people can apply lead and lag measures to their work.
Yeah, and it generally sounds healthy to look at the lead measures as much as you can. But the lag measures are there, like you said, just to check that you're seeing the results that you expect from doing the work. Do you find at the moment that you've got the lifestyle nailed down that you want to have, or in the future, what changes are you looking to make to improve it?
It's a good question. So when we were chatting before the interview, we were talking about COVID-19 restrictions and how they're creeping back in Ireland and unfortunately other countries. I do have the lifestyle in terms of control over my day, which is massive, which I'm really grateful for. But I suppose I'd like to be able to work in different locations more, or maybe travel and work more, maybe with the kids. Like we talked about going to Portugal for the summer and working over there. Don't know if we'll be doing that at the moment, but that's something I'd like to do more of, because I know I've always felt that when I'm in a job, that's quite hard to do. You have to plan around your holidays and whatever commitments you have in work. But when you're working for yourself, there's no reason why you can't do that apart from your own belief about why it's not possible.
Yeah, so you mentioned that your wife has a day job still, right?
Yeah, she does. She works as an occupational therapist in Ireland.
How would that work for her if you worked in Lisbon or somewhere in Portugal for 6 weeks? Would that be easy for her to manage as well, or is it?
Well, we haven't figured that out. So yeah. I guess she could potentially take extended holidays or adjust her working hours or take some unpaid leave. So, I mean, we're recording this in November, so we still have a few months to figure that out if we want to do it this year. But yeah, that would be definitely something that we'd need to talk about before we went ahead with a move like that.
I guess it's also, even with people who have day jobs now, because of the increase in remote work, that could potentially even be possible for some people to go to another country to work, even if they have a day job where they're working for somebody else. And especially, I guess, in your scenario where one person is their own boss and the other person is able to work remotely, you could do something like working from Lisbon for a little period. Is there something you've done before? Have you worked from another country before, or is it kind of a dream you've always wanted to fulfill?
No, I've never worked from another country before, unless you count work trips, which I don't think are the same. So before I had kids, I used to travel quite a bit. So I suppose now that the kids are a bit older, it'd be great to combine working and travel. And maybe this is coming out of the experience many people have had over the past year or year and a half, where we've all been forced to spend time in our houses and homes and apartments. So maybe we want to break out.
What's one mindset shift you think people listening today could make in their lives that make a positive difference?
That's a good question. So I would say whatever your idea is that you've been putting off for quite some time, for reasons like I don't have enough money, or I don't have enough free time, or I don't have resources to start on it today. So to take the example of writing a book, so my side is about writing, and I often hear from people who say, I like to write a book. I have a book inside of me, but I don't know how to write it. Many people want to write a book, but only a few actually will take the step to becoming an author. But you don't need to sacrifice everything to work on your personal goal or your passion project. You can work on it a little bit every day. So if the aspiring author sits down and writes 300 words, that'll only take them 15 or 20 minutes. If they do that 5 or 6 days a week, they'll write 2,000 or 3,000 words a week. If they do that for 3 or 4 months, they'll quickly finish a draft of 50 or 60,000 words. The draft will need editing and rewriting, but you have enough there to get feedback from an editor, potentially to turn into something that you can later publish. Perhaps after that, you don't want to write a book anymore, but you've still gotten something out into the world that you can call your own, and you've also still learned how to finish something. So don't put something off if it's been on your to-do list or bucket list for a long time, but you don't feel like today is the right time.
I think the mentality that causes that issue as well is where people think if they start, they have to get it all done today, or they try and do too much at once. Whereas, like I said, most things can be broken down a lot, and all you need to do is do the first step today, because then if you do the first step today, then tomorrow you just need to take another step. Whereas maybe the first step isn't writing 300 words. Maybe the first step is just kind of coming up with the idea or coming up with some characters. And you can do different things and just work out different ways to break down any big project so that it's manageable. So when you're working at Sage, it used to be, was it 7 a.m. every morning, or it was early every morning you used to wake up to do your own stuff on the side, or is it the evenings, or how did you manage that?
Yeah, I experimented with both approaches, and what I found was if I came home, at the time I was in an office before I moved to working from home, but if I came home and after the kids went to bed around 7:30, I'd open up the computer and turn on Word or Scrivener or whatever the writing app I was using, and I'd look at the flashing cursor and I'd feel exhausted because I've spent all day looking at a computer and all day in meetings and just doing work stuff, and then with family then when I came home. And so I had nothing left to write, no kind of creative energy. So what I found was it would be better if I got up in the morning and wrote for an hour before work. And to do that meant going to bed earlier. So I got rid of an Xbox console that I had, stopped playing Call of Duty and stopped playing World of Warcraft. And then I started going to bed at 9 or 9:30 or 10, depending on the day. And I get up at 6 or 6:30 and then work on that first thing. At one point I used to say to people, you need to write in the morning if you want to get anything done. But I recognize now that some people are creative in the evenings. So perhaps a better question to ask is, when am I most creative? When am I most productive? And can you align that with whatever project you're working on that's for you and not for someone else?
What I like that you said there as well is that you shifted your bedtime earlier. Whereas what a lot of people try to do is they try to increase what they're doing by cutting their sleeping time, which just doesn't work in the long run. It's just unsustainable. So it's a case of, if you think you're most productive in the morning, then you have to adjust your sleeping time if you want to make it a sustainable habit, right? Because I'm sure if you tried to sleep at your usual time of sleeping, let's say it's 11 or 12, and then you try to wake up at 6 a.m. every day, and you're getting 1 or 2 hours less sleep than you're used to, you'd start resenting that pretty quickly. And you probably wouldn't be at your best creatively either. And it's something even I'm doing now myself, is that I'm consciously making sure that I'm always having the right amount of sleep, because it's very easy in the evenings, but I can get one more thing done before I go to sleep. But often it's better to actually just sleep and try and do it in the morning when I've got more energy.
Yeah, what I did, there were some days where I did cut back on sleep, and what happened was, if I did it for a few days, I'd get a migraine, and then the whole day would be derailed, which would defeat the point. And then the second thing I did is I was like, my main hobby at the moment is long distance running, so I was training for a marathon at the time. So I bought a wearable fitness tracker, and it gives me like a recovery score each morning. And what I noticed was, anytime I cut back on sleep, I got an immediately low score. So that was a way of kind of like a prompt that I still need to get the right amount of 8 hours sleep if possible, and that maybe just to reduce my expectations about what's possible in a day. Because although I can overestimate what I can get done in a day, like many people, I can underestimate what I could do in a week or a month or a year.
Well, there's what about you saying your main hobby is running, because sometimes people think because you've taken your side business full time that your hobby is your business, when they are two different things. And I think it's really important for anybody who's taken something that they're passionate about full time to have a hobby as well. Something they're not doing for money, they're just doing for fun and the enjoyment. Do you feel like that happened to you, that once you took your business full time and it's what you're dependent on, that you enjoyed your writing and your content side less than you did before?
Yeah, it's a question I've thought about. If you work on something that's creative and you turn it into something you have to pay the bills with, it does put a bit of extra pressure the particular project. So I don't have an easy answer to that. Sometimes working on a content website is work. You have technical stuff on the site you need to fix, or your hosting company is saying there's something wrong with the site you can't figure out, or there was like a Google algorithm update during the summer where they looked at the page load times of your site, and it was just quite stressful to get ready for this update. And because it's Google, you never really know whether you've done it right or not. So that stuff's not fun. But I still enjoy writing content and writing articles and editing and publishing and researching keywords and finding topics to write about. So I still find that fun. So I guess it's a question of, or not a question, but I guess it's a balancing act, maybe accepting that some parts will be fun and some parts will be work. But I guess that's the same for anybody, even if they love what they do.
I think it's just important for everybody to be aware of that even if you do something which you love, there's always going to be some bits that feel like work and some days where you don't feel as motivated. And that's not a problem. That's not something you should be ashamed of. It happens to everybody. You're not a fraud for sometimes thinking that this is a chore, even though people might think as you're living a dream. So, Bryan, it's been a pleasure to chat to you. Where can the listeners hear more from you?
Thanks for having me on. Yes, so if you're interested in getting advice about the craft of writing, visit becomeawritertoday.com. I also have a podcast where I interview authors and writers about their creative processes. So just type Become a Writer Today into iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcast, and it should come up. And if you visit the site, I'll give you a free book of writing prompts. I'm also on Twitter at Bryan, Bryan J. Collins.
The final thing to finish up on is, what's one small thing that's brought you joy recently?
What's one small thing that's brought me joy recently? So I bought a pair of carbon plate runners or trainers, depending where you're listening, because I'm training for a marathon in February, and they've shaved a few seconds off my running time. So for a runner, that brings a small joy.
If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, I'd love it if you could leave me a 5-star review. It really helps to get the message out further. Wherever you're listening, it would be awesome if you could subscribe and to share on your social media channels. If you want to see more of my work and advice, you can find all of the links in the show notes. Thank you again for listening, and I hope you have a lovely day.